You're resting up after a long day at the saloon with your pals. It's a balmy night and the wind is blowing through your window. Suddenly, a low rumbling interrupts your peaceful slumber. The rumbling continues, only growing louder and more intense. You feel a deep sense of dread in your guts as you rush outside to see if anyone else in town is concerned. But before you can step out of your house, the floor cracks below you and you are shocked by a sonic boom. You wake minutes, or hours, or days later to see that your town has turned to ash and dust. The air is dense. What happened? And where do you go now? These were the questions that survivors of the Great Tumbleweed Town explosion of 2021 had to face. This is Mina Stevens, and you're listening to Oddz and Endz, the podcast where I investigate lost narratives and unsolved mysteries. In this episode of Oddz and Endz, I'm investigating the hidden history of Tumbleweed Town, a quaint community tucked away from modern society. Located in the center of the 52-mile sand pit surrounded by Oklahoma City, the town had little contact or awareness of the outside world. Not much is known about Tumbleweed Town, and only a handful of the already small population remains. Fortunately, I was able to locate 6 survivors and arrange interviews with 5 of them. 2 of these survivors are twin sisters, Chatty Cherry and Honey Honey.
Hello, I'm Chatty Cherry.
And I'm Honey Honey.
Cherry is a gifted seamstress, and Honey ran the general store in town.
We're in our 40s, but some may say 30s. I haven't gotten 20-something.
Oh my God, you don't have to give them the details.
I feel young.
Then we have Insufferable Irwin, who ran the bank.
My name is Insufferable Irwin. I'm from Tumbleweed Town originally, but now I live by myself.
Genius Jerry, who ran the apothecary.
I'm Genius Jerry. I run the apothecary in town. I try to be humble, but, it's in the name. I'm kind of known for my intelligence.
And Klutzy Kendall, daughter of the mayor and apprentice at the apothecary.
Hi, my name is Klutzy Kendall. I am 24 years old.
With all of their stories combined, I've been able to piece together aspects of Tumbleweed Town's history leading up to its destruction. But some mysteries are best left unsolved. At the heart of Tumbleweed Town was an elaborate annual tradition called the Tumbleweed Pageant, a week-long festival celebrating the ancient art of tumbleweed wrangling. The pageant was repeatedly won by one legendary man, Tumbleweed Tim. Tim has lost one tumbleweed pageant, but this one loss is presumed to have ultimately led to the town's demise. Daily life in Tumbleweed Town was simple. When they weren't preparing for the tumbleweed pageant, they were enjoying each other's company. Well, most of the time.
Everybody knows each other.
Did I know everyone? Yes. Did I like everyone? No.
I'm aware when people are coming, so I kind of knew what my day would be like. We'd sort of batten down the hatches when Insufferable Irwin was going to come in. I don't know. Again, it's in the name.
We would talk to each other. There was a lot of napping, I'm going to be honest. Dancing at the ponytail, that was always a good time.
Mm-hmm. It was easy. It was easy to understand. I'm very good with money.
Are you?
Well, in Tumbleweed Town.
A popular local hangout spot, or the only local hangout spot, was the Pony's Tail, a saloon with a vibrant atmosphere and a haven for seasoned gossipers.
It was definitely how I got to know most of the residents better.
Okay, I didn't know this. So you can't drink until you're 21. Well, in Tumbleweed Town, we don't have that law, so the bartender has been serving me Dirty Shirley's. I'm kind of crazy like that since I was 12.
I was never a huge fan of the bartender or the bar. I think that's kind of antithetical to my profession. I think I serve medication in a respectful way, whereas others tend to eschew medication and seek out other more unsavory forms of, ways to placate their demons.
The Pony's Tail wouldn't be the same without the talented pianist Ghastly Gavin, who worked tirelessly day and night to keep spirits high.
He was pretty chill. I appreciated his music, and, I'd ask him to play this one song over and over again. And a lot of people got annoyed, but he would do it for me.
I was quite impressed. Any playing he did really blew me away.
We have a complicated relationship. Gavin and I. He thinks he's so above everyone, you know, in his, he doesn't believe in gossip. He doesn't believe in talking about people behind their back.
I always had a great appreciation for music. I think he played a little too much ragtime. And I think my preference has always been the more classical side, even more an avant-jazz sort of bent.
I don't know where he gets this high horse, and I wish he would fall off of it.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that man knows the ins and outs of every single part of Tumbleweed Town. I think every time he pretends he doesn't want to gossip, he is listening.
Gavin is also the 6th survivor I located. He chose not to be interviewed, but he did share recordings of himself playing original compositions to be used in the podcast. One mystery that I just can't figure out is that drinking was such an integral part of Tumbleweed Town's culture, and yet no one seems to remember who the bartender was.
Never knew his name.
I can't say we interacted much. I tended to avoid the bar because that's where Gavin was. I had no business talking to him, so I also just didn't know the bartender. I wish I did, and that's just one of the things I'll hold with me, that I just don't know the bartender.
With a population of only around a dozen individuals, how did no one know the bartender? From what I gathered, there seemed to be an immense amount of distrust across the community. Both Genius Jerry and Klutzy Kendall commented on their frustration with drama monger Chatty Cherry.
I've never trusted her with anything regarding, like, my clothes.
Chatty Cherry, oh my god. One can never shut the fuck up. I'm like, there's literally 16 of us in this town. How do you have so much to say?
I'm not a huge fan of gossip, but I always found her very willing to gossip.
Also, she would say the meanest things to me. She'd always be like, you need to lose some weight. Or like, when do you have a boyfriend? I'm like, the only other option for like a male around my age is Genius Gary. And you think I'm going for Genius Gary? No.
While gossip certainly kept the town entertained, the man who kept everything running was the now deceased Mayor Murphy.
He's a very family values, traditional oriented man.
You know, I never really agreed with his politics. He's kind of comes from a different school than I do. You know, I understand the importance of traditions, but also as a newcomer, there were points where I did not feel as welcome.
The mayor he likes things the same. He likes for every year we have the pageant, he likes it happens every year. He likes when things are every single year the same, everything the same.
My father was the mayor. I miss him dearly. He exploded. I saw it.
You know, there's kind of also a little bit of a combative relationship with him and Kendall because, you know, Kendall was such a klutz. You know, she's all over the place.
He was a funny, charismatic guy. And I wish he just wasn't so stubborn.
The relationship with her and the mayor was just not what it should have been. The pageant was his baby first, I think.
On my 10th birthday, you know, we had a party. Everyone was invited. But I could see the joy in his eyes was so much greater every year for the Tumbleweed pageant. And that hurt a little. But I knew he loved me, just seconds.
After his daughter started working for me, I think he kind of sees that there's this tension between us. There's like this kind of will they, won't they thing going on.
As a traditionalist, the mayor, as well as the rest of the town, were beyond shocked when they gained an additional citizen in 2013. This new member, Ogden Oddman, challenged Tumbleweed Tim in the Tumbleweed pageant. Fueled with jealousy, Oddman murdered Tim's beloved cat, Mr. Orange, in a brutal explosion in hopes that Tim would drop out of the pageant. Tim did not drop out, but Oddman won the pageant regardless, breaking Tim's reigning title and the town's heart. The next day, Tumbleweed Tim was nowhere to be found. 7 years later, Tim miraculously reappeared in town. He won the pageant the next year, reclaiming his title, and not soon after, the town exploded. We're lucky that Kendall is alive to carry out her father's legacy and tell the many stories of the Tumbleweed pageant.
His daughter is a bit awkward, I think.
She has really caused hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss for the apothecary, just for like the stuff that she breaks on a regular basis, because it's all glass.
Kendall could not keep a job. She never has been able to.
I'm glad to, you know, be a sort of mentor / possible romantic interest for her in a way that she doesn't even fully understand.
Genius Jerry and Klutzy Kendall's relationship came up often in discussion. There was much speculation about the two of them ever dating, but as co-workers at the apothecary, I can see how that could get messy. Genius Jerry soon played an integral part in the community by running the apothecary after he moved in.
He wasn't a looker. I'll say that. A lot of people wanted us to get together. But he had the brains, and he was always making us feel better with his elixirs.
We used to say Genius Jerry. We just say Jerry. I don't know where the genius title came from. He must have given it to himself because that man is. I don't think he's a genius at all.
I like genius.
He thinks he's a genius. He doesn't like Tim, and I don't think I can trust someone who doesn't like Tim so openly.
We knew each other a little bit better, I think, just having similar experiences, moving in around the same time.
Both Erwin and Jerry moved to Tumbleweed Town after Tumbleweed Tim's disappearance, providing a different perspective on the town compared to those who knew Tim before his return.
We were pretty close. He's a very, very smart man, but, he kind of lets everybody else know it.
While our team thought Genius Jerry and Chatty Cherry were appropriate alliterations given their personalities, I couldn't quite figure out what was up with Insufferable Erwin's nickname, but apparently neither could he.
I didn't get my own nickname. I'm not even quite sure why I got my nickname, to be perfectly honest.
Erwin has always been this short, angry man who's always kind of been around since he's moved to Tumbleweed Town.
He was insufferable. I think that's perfect. Like, he was kind of like an older brother to me. And what's the point of having an older brother if they're not annoying as hell? I've learned that.
Honestly, when we got together, however many years back, I think I was kind of desperate for a distraction from everything going on with Tim leaving and all
he
the
was
drama.
so separate from all the everything going on.
He didn't know my friends. It was like, wow, someone who's not in my inner circle, just like every single other person that I have to interact with every day.
He was a nice guy.
Yeah, he was fine. He was kind of had this
he was a cutie,
but he was cute.
He was cute, yeah.
See, that's the thing with Erwin. It's like we came in, and it's like we were both kind of newcomers here, but it's like I got it, and he didn't. Like, I kind of got what was going on, and he didn't. Like, I'm very aware of what's going on here.
The happenings that Jerry is referring to is Tim's disappearance, which the town was still grieving from upon Jerry and Erwin's arrival. It was interesting to compare the opinions of longtime Tumbleweed Town residents versus those of latecomers when it comes to Tumbleweed Tim. Was Tumbleweed Tim truly a praiseworthy champion, or was he just a lazy freeloader?
You have to be a special type of someone to always win the Tumbleweed pageant.
I always thought he was kind of cute.
Yeah, everyone did, didn't he? He was always winning the pageants. I mean, like...
Someone once told me he was gay.
No way. Wait,
yeah.
I heard that too. Who told me that?
No way.
Who told me that?
I don't want to say on air.
Oh, you're right.
I'll whisper it to you.
It's okay.
From how I heard about it, and then, when he reappeared, which is why I think some people were upset about it, it's like you have this guy who exists basically only to win. He's a person with a lot of tall tales, but it's like, at the end of the day, what is he doing in this community?
He was kind of weird, to be perfectly honest. I almost felt a little threatened by him being there.
To me, he felt like a modern Hercules.
How so?
He was a culture hero for us. He was, he represented our town, but he didn't necessarily have a higher calling.
He would always say cryptic things, prophecies, maybe. I remember one time I was 17. I was young in the world, but not really, because I was just in Tumbleweed Town. He came up to me and he said, "I see in your future lots of misery." And I'm like, that's a weird thing to say, kid. Like, what the hell?
That is weird.
It was
kind of rude.
At the time, I was just really confused. Looking back, yeah, it was kind of rude.
Everybody has their own talents, right? And his talent was the Tumbleweed pageant, but at the end of the day, that talent is sort of useless to the greater community other than sort of morale. And then after many, many years winning in a row, is that good for morale at the end of the day? Because, other people deserve to win.
He predicted the town exploding, actually. He said, you will lose everything in an explosion.
He's just not really a savory character, and it's like his return only kind of was a portent of doom. Not soon after he came back, the town exploded, of course.
After hearing these anecdotes, I was curious about the presence of religion in Tumbleweed Town, if any presence at all. I asked the interviewees, was Tumbleweed Town religious?
Religious in the way that everyone had their own practice, and that we all knew what everyone else was following, but we weren't all under one faith, so I'm not so sure about God.
We didn't have many books in Tumbleweed Town, but we had the New Testament, we had the Old Testament, and we had the Quran. So I know a little bit about religion, and there's the story of Sodom and how God set fire to it. We were all just so absorbed in our ways. The tumbleweed pageant had consumed us, and I think God struck us down.
I would like to think I'm sort of above, like religion as a whole. I'm kind of above it. I'm too smart for it. I've always been an atheist. Well, there was a brief Scientology, but other than that, I've kind of been above it. So I kind of can see through this facade, this kind of mask he puts up of this kind of charismatic, almost cult-esque leader. I mean, he's not commanding people in the same way, and he's not living... Well, I say that, but no one knows what he was doing for the time that he was gone.
Have you ever suffered from anxiety or depression? You deserve those thoughts because you're a bad person and everyone hates you. That is just a taste of what we can give you at Worse Help, leader in reverse psychology. If your sad and miserable existence is just too tough to bear, maybe you are the problem. That's where we come in and tell you how awful you truly are. We can't reshape your brain, God knows it's deformed enough as it is, but we can tell you exactly what's wrong with you without offering any solutions at all. First-time users, enter code CRYBABY at worsehelp.com to get a 20% price increase for your first 3 months. Worse Help. Feel worse.
There's another character integral to the story of Tumbleweed Town that you should know about, Scary Annie. What's so perplexing about Scary Annie is that records show she appeared in Oklahoma City just 2 days before Tumbleweed Town's explosion. I asked the survivors about this observation, and many of them were just as confused as I was.
You know, once you come to Tumbleweed Town, you don't exactly leave.
Maybe she had something to do with the explosion. I didn't know that she left before. That's really weird.
To say.
She was sort of a loner already, you know, like I would not be surprised if she just wanted to leave.
Well, the rumor is that she got some of the modern technology that I am now well acquainted with, and she met a woman, and she fell in love. I don't think 2 women should be doing that.
Annie wasn't always referred to as Scary Annie. She was at one point known as Approachable Annie.
I do vaguely remember her when I was younger and just how sweet she was. And, you know, she would always encourage everyone who participated in the Tumbleweed pageant, even though we all knew Tumbleweed Tim was going to win. She was so encouraging to all of us, and she was just so sweet.
Before she was Scary Annie, she was dating none other than Tumbleweed Tim, until one day, he broke up with her.
Well, they had a thing, but then he dumped her and, you know, started putting all his time into tumbleweed wrangling.
All through the night, we would hear them screaming and screaming. It was just like...
I remember. Don't have to tell me.
Because he's gay.
Well, from what I've heard, Annie and Tim's relationship was sort of... There is this kind of imbalance of power. She was very nice, but he was... At least what I heard, a little bit older, and obviously there's this position of power. She loved tumbleweeds, and he was sort of the tumbleweed king of the town.
It would seem like she's the problem because Tim was nothing but kind. Everyone loved him, you know. He was a kind soul. He came back, he was still exactly the same, so kind, just a nice man. And to be yelling like that with Annie.
After Tim's disappearance, the interviewees speculate that she and the man who broke Tim's winning streak, Ogden Oddman, became close.
She started seeing Ogden, and her whole demeanor changed.
Many of the townspeople were surprised by this sudden happening and uncomfortable with the relationship due to Ogden's violent tendencies after he murdered Tumbleweed Tim's cat, Mr. Orange.
He was scary. He was a scary man. And everyone said that too. I mean, everyone I talked to was like, this guy, he comes and he just shows up, tries to win our pageant, tries to have the best tumbleweed, and under what authority is he allowed to do that? Scary man.
His sort of body and build was a scare tactic, just the way he looked at people.
Very imposing, very large. You think of just a large lumen threat, someone you wouldn't want to mess with.
I mean, there were times where I did think he was 2 people stacked on top of each other.
Approached by very few people. Not many people wanted to be friends with him.
No one really spoke to him, and maybe that was the problem. Maybe just in hindsight, maybe he just needed a little friend, but he didn't make himself available for friendship.
We knew that Ogden and Annie weren't good for each other, but also in the same way, we knew that Ogden really cared about her in his sort of his twisted way, in his sort of intense way.
I asked the interviewees what their thoughts were on the year that Ogden Oddman won the tumbleweed pageant.
He has the same passion for tumbleweeds that anyone else in this town had, and of course he had the talent to win the pageant.
That was an interesting year. I don't I don't want to talk about it. Because that's when it all started to go to shit, man.
If there's anyone who's going to be exploding anything, it's definitely him.
The day Ogden won was not only a dark day because of Tumbleweed Tim's defeat, but also because of the death of Mr. Orange.
I mean, he was as integral to the town as my father, the mayor. It was a sad day in Tumbleweed Town. It was honestly, we were mourning for a few months because Mr. Orange, brought us a lot of joy and a lot of solace as well. And he was just a special guy. We had a lot to learn from him.
When I asked Chatty Cherry for an explanation she might have for Ogden's behavior, she told us this.
Well, he lived under a rock, literally. So that is the best place to hide from an explosion, I would think.
This was when I learned about two essential landmarks in Tumbleweed Town. The Big Rock and the other Big Rock.
Well, now, the Big Rock was one end of town, and the other Big Rock marked the other end.
The first one was to the west of the town. The other big rock was to the northeast, so it's not exactly on the other side of town. But they were our boundaries. We didn't cross them.
I guess we didn't really go past the rocks.
I went on a date once on one of the rocks.
You and your dates.
I know. It was cute, though.
I'm sure it was.
I guess one story I do have with Honey was we were, going stargazing out at the other Big Rock one night. And, it was beautiful out. It was a nice, comfortable temperature. And we were just talking. And in the middle of the night, things get quite shifty around town, I feel. I never felt unsafe, but, it's kind of weird. I heard some noises, wasn't quite sure what it was, but it's just something that hasn't been able to leave my mind.
While Tumbleweed Town was a generally peaceful place, there were still instances of crime. I asked the former residents about what they remember regarding the sheriff, whose name was Sleepy Slug.
Simple answers. He doesn't do anything. He's everywhere. He doesn't do anything, though.
He never remembered my name. He always called me Gary. It's okay if you forget the genius part, because sometimes people do, and it's mostly okay.
He didn't do a lot.
As far as police forces go, he really did not get much stuff done.
There was a scuffle one time at my bank, and of course, who else would you call on for help but from the sheriff? He comes and, was not helpful at all. He didn't even know who I was.
He was sleeping a lot. No, honestly, I've never seen that man awake. I kind of thought he was dead for most of my life, and we just kept him up there.
Sheriff Sleepy Slug's lackadaisical approach to his job serves as a partial explanation for why there are so many unsolved cases in Tumbleweed Town. The strangest unsolved case by far is the case of the second Mr. Orange. Upon Tumbleweed Tim's return in 2020, he had somehow recovered Mr. Orange. Whether this was a new cat, the same cat, or a cat at all is widely debated amongst the townsfolk I spoke with. Was this some sort of widespread memory loss due to the explosion? Why couldn't they agree on something that felt so simple?
It was absolutely a cat, I think. Could you think not cat?
What? No, I think it was a man, and I think they were living together, and I think it was part of this whole gay Tim escapade. And let me just tell you, as someone who runs the general store and sees who comes in and sees what for, that man was never buying cat food.
I would like to say, firstly, I never got close to the cat, but there's only so many kinds of cats. A lot of cats look very similar, so I wouldn't firstly be surprised if he had just got a new cat, sort of as an image booster. He needs a sidekick. He needs automatically a sort of pet by his side to show he can control things. It was a large cat. I've heard the middle-aged man theory. I don't buy it in that the sounds were very realistic, and I've never heard a real man recreate those cat sounds, because that was a loud cat. It was something that I would hear at night, the sort of the mewling.
I know as a man, and I've been exposed to many things since I've gone to the city. And this middle-aged man had an affinity for lasagna. And I think it was, tell me if I'm using this term right, but okay, a Garfield cosplayer.
Obviously, if you still refer to it as Mr. Orange, could it be a son? You could also talk about sort of cloning, or even like a pretty rudimentary animatronic. If you were to recreate Mr. Orange from his sort of exploded parts, along with probably any other cat, I think you could probably make a pretty believable animatronic, or at least I could make a pretty believable animatronic.
Who am I to get into somebody else's business?
Yeah, right. Fair enough.
I say cat.
Again, I didn't get close enough to see. It was a very still cat. It was loud, but it wasn't really jumping around a lot. It did seem older. I do think something was up with it.
My memory is a little bit scuffed from the explosion. I've heard Honey Honey tell me that she secretly thinks he was a man, but I don't know if I believe that. I'm pretty sure that was just a cat.
Part of what made Tumbleweed Tim's disappearance so distressing for the town was that nobody truly knew what existed outside their town. The only time they ever had any real contact with the outside world was during the Tumbleweed pageant, when they brought in outsiders to judge the pageant to keep it fair.
I've had some fun with outsiders. It's always nice to have a new face, someone that you don't have to worry about seeing every single day on the way to work or whatever. At the same time, though, it's like all of a sudden there's all this pressure on Tumbleweed Town.
You can't describe Tumbleweed Town without talking about the Tumbleweed pageant. I was incredibly curious about this event, and the interviewees were excited to share their experiences.
Oh my gosh, best day of the year.
Every participant in the Tumbleweed pageant dresses up.
We didn't have much entertainment, so this Tumbleweed pageant was the talk of the town for the whole year.
I thought about applying for the pageant a few years. I was always looking around at Tumbleweeds and thinking, that could make a good one. Oh, I definitely could do this. Like, this is definitely within my skill set, but I also I didn't want to engage with that tradition.
Something that came up in almost all my interviews was the debated ethics of the old sport of tumbleweed wrangling.
I have always had a belief that tumbleweeds are not sentient. And maybe this is something I've really come to terms with recently after exposure to the scientific world and all, the types of things that people talk about now. And my work at Trader Joe's, where we, for example, sell plants and all these types of things every day. And it really feels to me more of a commodity than a living, breathing thing. And so I've never had a problem with it, but I completely understand people who do, and I have been willing to support people who.
Well, that's where we disagree as sisters,
The Tumbleweed pageant was divided into 4 sections: build, role, talent, and interview. The build portion focused on the tumbleweed size, density, and shape.
It's certainly much more impressive to be able to wrangle a big tumbleweed than, a little puny one.
Density is really kind of where the key was. I think size, if it was a remarkable size, it could be good. Like if it was huge, if it was larger than a man, then yes.
Even if one little part of the tumbleweed was out of line, we would talk about it.
The roll category tested the tumbleweed's ability to roll across the ground, and in some cases, summon background music.
For me, I always wanted to prioritize the roll.
If the tumbleweed doesn't roll well, there's no way you're going to win.
I remember that was always the most silent portion.
Chatty Cherry and Honey Honey explained to me that Tumbleweed Tim had a knack for wrangling tumbleweeds that would produce musical motifs when they rolled.
Well, he didn't play it. It was as if the tumbleweed itself was making this noise.
That. Yes, it was very successful.
Not every tumbleweed makes a sound when it rolls, but the ones that do, that's how you know you got a good one.
I was looking for, a pit orchestra, like where is this music coming from? Because sometimes, you hear it and it's very faint. And it's like, do you believe if that's real?
The talent section was where I began to get a little lost.
Well, tumbleweeds have all sorts of talents. Some of them sing, some of them are able to do acrobatics.
Talent was very much sort of based on aura.
My favorite are the ones that involve any kind of art, when the talent can be artistic.
Of course you do.
When the tumbleweed can roll and it can create color on the ground, when it can interact with other media like paint. I remember one year there was some pastel action, just kind of like because then it's like a dance, but it's also a creating a piece of art, and then you get a piece of art after this talent section.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes there would be tumbleweeds that would kind of combust very lightly, not enough to destroy itself, but sort of like almost as if shedding its outer layer. There were tumbleweeds that could float just slightly, and again, I was looking out for strings in that regard. So sort of these otherworldly talents that, I never quite believed were real.
After hearing about the talent section, I was prepared to try and understand the interview portion as well.
Very rarely was there an audible answer. It was always between the judges and the tumbleweed.
For most of the years, the tumbleweeds that I wrangle, it's hard to tell their interview skills from afar, and I can't sit down and talk to them before I wrangle them.
When speaking with Insufferable Irwin, he brought up that each pageant was centered around a specific theme.
One of my favorite themes was astronauts. Oh man, you should have seen the tumbleweeds. They were crazy. It was like gravity didn't even exist for them.
I was lucky that Irwin was my first interviewee. So after that, I was excited to ask the other former residents about their favorite themes.
I don't know. I was never a huge fan of the themes. I was never a huge fan of Irwin, if I'm going to be honest. Let me just say this. It makes sense to me why he would like that.
We had the Old Testament with us, so we did have 4 years in the desert theme. That was a good year.
A year was the theme was on the Bronte sisters, and I really loved that.
There was a theme that was just like rock and sand. That was kind of weird.
It became clear very early on that life in Tumbleweed Town was drastically different from life in Oklahoma City. I invited each of the Tumbleweed Town survivors to share their experience adjusting to their new lives.
Yeah, I live in the city now. I enjoy geocaching. I enjoy puzzles. I like going to the cat cafe. You know, the interesting thing about growing up in Tumbleweed Town is we really only had like the saloon and city hall, and I never thought there would be a need for a cat cafe, so I frequent there. I am in debt.
I work at a Kohl's right now. It's not the dream. It just feels so different than what we used to be doing. I used to be making things to make them because it was wanted and needed, and there was no this sense of I buy a t-shirt. It's like what does that mean? Why is that? And it's so normal here. It's like I go into work every day and I do my work, but it's not the same.
Stocks and things like that. I currently work in personal finance, but it is one of the most confusing things I've ever done with my life. And I worked at a bank with a whole bunch of confusing people for a while.
I don't want to impose my ideals on anyone, but I really do think that our Tumbleweed Town economy was much more efficient and kinder.
I'm a Trader Joe's gal myself. I prefer it to Kohl's for many obvious reasons. It reminds me more of the general store I ran back home before you know what.
So I'm indebted to 3 people or places: my landlord, the cat cafe, and the local phone repair store.
One nice thing about being in the city is that there's so much drama and gossip, but it's not people that we have to like interact with every second of every day.
We hardly know. I would say we barely know anyone. It's so different.
You walk around the street, it's like
everyone. Strangers. Like, where do they come from? They come out of nowhere. There's so many people.
So I do drive people around with some apps, Uber, Lyft. I do that. I pick up groceries. People here are so lazy.
A lot of people just drive, and we still don't drive. We still walk everywhere.
The last thing I was curious about was if any of the living residents have been in contact with one another. I asked Insufferable Irwin and Honey Honey if they were in contact with one another, since the two were in a relationship prior to the explosion.
I haven't seen her since the explosion. I mean, I just hope she's still alive out there somewhere. I've been trying to look, but...
Have you spoken to him?
No, I haven't.
Right? Okay. Yeah. So does he know where you are?
I don't fucking know.
Okay, because we didn't know where he was. Okay.
I also asked Genius Jerry and Klutzy Kendall the same.
We write. We don't really see each other. The city's so big. There's been a lot of talk about getting a meal. You know, it's definitely going to happen, but it's going to be a kind of thing where it's like the schedules work out because, you know, she's busy. And I'm kind of busy.
I haven't gotten any of his letters. Tell him to send them to the cat cafe.
I truly wish the best for these former residents of Tumbleweed Town as they carry the history of the town with them. Although much remains unsolved, such as the whereabouts of Scary Annie and Ogden Oddman, assuming he survived the explosion, I'm incredibly grateful for the time these radiant individuals took to share their stories with me. This was Oddz and Endz, and thank you for listening.